Hi, my name is Jocelyn Hammond, and this is my slideshow for Ed 535. My slideshow is on the models that foster reorganizing skills, specifically looking into synectics. To start off, what is synectics? Synectics was created in 1961 by William Gordon. Synectics promotes creative thinking and problem solving while using analogies and metaphors, and it's also used along quite often with collaboration, exploration, analogies, and creative thinking. Looking at synectics in the classroom, it can be used in any classroom and subject. Generally, it's seen in grades K through 12, and it can be used quite easily. In the elementary grades, you can look at it at the concrete and visual aspect, and for upper grades, it's more of an abstract. For use in the classroom, it can be seen working with metaphors, recognizing analogies, and also within STEM or STEAM activities, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. The purpose of the lesson model. For my purpose of the Synectics lesson model, I put it is to promote creative thinking along with exploration in the classroom while using metaphors and analogies, all while the students are collaborating with one another or within groups. An overview of the lesson. The lesson I'm doing will be looking at analogies and connecting shapes to real life objects. We'll be looking at math. Within the math, we'll be looking at shapes. My grade is kindergarten, and my ages of my students are ages 5 and 6. For the standards, I took this from the North Dakota State Standards website. This is looking at geometry. K.J.1, it is to describe objects in the environment using names of shapes and solids, so shapes such as squares, circles, triangles, rectangles, cubes, and spheres. K.J.2 is to correctly name shapes and solids, again as the shapes I named above, regardless of their orientations or overall size. And K.J.3 identify shapes and solids, again as those shapes I named above, while looking at a two-dimensional or three-dimensional. Learning objective. I put that my objective would be students will explore the shapes and determine if what other shapes could fit inside the shape that they are looking at. So students will collaborate in groups and determine what other shapes and objects would fit inside the shape they're looking at. For rationale, I chose the model Synectics, which falls under category 2, models that foster reorganizing skills. I chose this because I was looking at the other lesson models, and I truly felt that my students would best fit this one just because they're so enjoying the fact that they can work in groups and working with others, and it really excites them every day. And I try to work a group project every day into my classroom somehow, so I thought that this would be a good way to do it. Furthermore, my students have already began to investigate shapes, and they do know the basic shapes and what they look like and their attributes, so I thought that this would be a great follow-up lesson, and it will also engage them into higher thinking in the fact of them looking at shapes and deciding what kind of real life objects could fit into those shapes. Materials and setup. I have 13 students, so I will split them into groups. One group will probably have one more student than the rest. I will display a circle on the smartboard and show that that is what they're trying to fill, so they have a visual. Students will receive a graph on a piece of paper so that they can document the shapes they put inside of it, and then I'll also display pictures of shapes. Phase 1 is identification of topic area. The description of this phase, I as the teacher will determine what I want my students to explore, and I'll tell them what they're looking at as far as the big picture or the big idea. An example of this would be me displaying the images that we've learned already in class and tell them that they're supposed to fill the circle with shapes that they will examine in order to fill the circle. Phase 2 is direct analogy. In this phase, I will use a direct analogy coming up with a metaphoric comparison between two ideas. In this phase, one is the concept and the other is the analog. For an example, I will tell my students a circle is like a basketball. That gives them a real life picture, and that will begin to engage them in order to get to phase 3. Phase 3 is a personal analogy. A description of this phase, students will begin to think in their head, on their own first, how they can decide how they'll fill the object. I will try to tell them to come up with, the conceptual object and then the analog. An example of this, I will ask my students to close their eyes and try to tell them that they are inside the object, so they need to pretend. They need to fill the basketball, baseball, or whatever object that they are trying, as long as it's a circle, basically is what we're going to do for the first one. They're going to try to fill it with tiny objects or other shapes. After we do this for a few moments, I'll have them open their eyes and raise their hands to share their thoughts with the class. For phase 4, analog contrast, a description of this phase, students are now contrasting the analog along with the conceptual object, and then they're going to examine the differences. For this example of the phase, I put that they will tell other students what they imagined when they were inside the ball, and now they need to imagine that they're outside of it, filling it with the objects. The technology that can be used in this phase will be the picture on the smartboard, and then I'll have other objects off to the side, and what they'll do is group by group go up with, I have a pointer object that they can drag objects inside the circle just to see how many objects and shapes they can fit inside of it. For an assessment for this phase, I believe I could get a good assessment out of it. I will create a graph and then have the students draw the different shapes to show me, and this would be the graph that I give them at the beginning. This is going to be their proof or test, if you will, to show me that they understood what they were supposed to do. For phase 5, new analogy, in this phase they're exploring both the similarities, which would be phases 2 and 3, and the differences, which is from phase 4, between the conceptual objects and the analog, and then they will create their own direct analogy. For an example of this, I will have students brainstorm with their groups an analogy that they feel could correlate to shapes. For an adaptation in this phase, I could assist struggling students in my class by helping them come up with an analogy, or I could pair my students based off of level to work with other students who are at the same level as them to accomplish the goal. Phase 6 is topic refocus. In this phase, I, as the teacher, will return to the original theme or conceptual topic, and I will have my students tell me their reflection. In this phase, an example, what I would do is have each group choose a spokesperson or somebody who is able to tell me their findings from the experiment, and each group should be able to tell me how many objects they could fit in and what that object or shape was. For an assessment, I will do an oral assessment for this so I can check for understanding and basically give them a grade based off of the oral response that they give me during the reflection. My personal reflection on this assignment, I did learn a lot about Synectics and all that it includes, including analogies and metaphors. To be honest, I'm kind of nervous that my kindergarten students wouldn't fully understand what I'm talking about. Therefore, I said I would need to probably change some terms or come up with easier terms that they would understand in order for them to follow along. But I do believe that I could be successful when I teach this lesson. I just might need some extra guidance, before teaching it to my students, as Synectics is also new to me. That is all I have. Thank you so much for listening.